Operating systems and hardware, of course, are two of the three components, in addition to software, that we use on a computer system. And software can certainly do all kinds of wonderful things, whether it be for business purposes or some fun things as well. But often what we want to do is not just input information using a keyboard and a mouse, but sometimes we want to output information. And that's when we need to start to talk about another very popular piece of hardware known as the printer. In this chapter, we need to talk about several different things. We need to learn what types of printers are available, what their different features are, how we can install them and use them in our operating system along with our software so that we can output all of the wonderful things that we want. Whether they be business reports, presentations, school reports, or even those cherished holiday photos. All of these things outputted on a printer give us that longevity that we want and something that we can kind of touch and feel. Even though sometimes we want to work for a paperless society, still printing is something that's very popular and a skill that everybody needs to know when using their PC. Probably the second most common thing that we do with applications, other than saving a file, is to actually print a file. So let's start with the basic question, what is a printer? Well, going back to our basic concepts, a printer, of course, is a piece of hardware, and it's also an output device. It's how we get information out of the computer into a hard copy that we can have. Now, a hard copy simply means it's printed on usually paper. There's all kinds of different paper stock, and we're not going to get into that now. But creating a hard copy version of a file is something that people still want to do a lot of. Each printer, again, can be very different, including having special output features. Here are some examples of some printing devices, and again, they come in many different shapes and sizes. On the top left, we have something that really is hard to find anymore, except in special businesses that need them, and that's a dot matrix printer. If you've ever heard a dot matrix printer, you know it's a very unique sound. And it's something that we heard a lot of, probably 15 to 20 years ago. But these days, inkjet and laserjet printers have replaced them. The reason we still like dot matrix printers is because they're called an impact printer, meaning it physically hits the paper. That's what's important if you have to have carbon copies. So many businesses that have to have carbon copies, like for statements and invoices, still use a dot matrix printer. In the middle of the top row, we have an inkjet. Inkjets are probably the most popular for consumer printers because they're fairly inexpensive. You buy little cartridges of ink, anywhere from 3 to 5 colors, and the printer goes ahead and makes a very good quality. In fact, it can even be photo quality reproduction using an inkjet printer. You do have to be a little careful because depending on what kind of ink you have, sometimes they're not water resistant. So if you spill something on it, it actually can smear. But the inks these days are getting much, much better. The monster on the top right and the one on the bottom left are actually examples of laser jets. We hear about a lot of these in business because they're fast, they're fairly inexpensive, and they have very high quality output. Laser printers can be either monochrome or black and white or color. These days, color laser jets are becoming more popular and to print color is becoming less expensive. But still, printing in color is usually more expensive than printing in black and white. A couple of special printers that we have are on the bottom right side. The one in the middle is a multifunction printer. This one not only prints, but it also will scan and possibly even fax and make copies. These also are becoming very popular, especially in home offices and small offices, because you get 3 or 4 machines in one. And the last one on the right is a large format printer, something that could be used by architects or people who do graphic design and need to print out banners and posters. It's kind of hard to see from this picture, but actually this is roughly about 4 to 5 feet wide. That's definitely a lot larger than these others, most of which will sit right on a desktop. We've mentioned some of these printing devices, or at least shown you some pictures of them, so now let's discuss them a little bit more. There are, of course, many, many different types, brands, and models of printers. Entry-level to very high-end. A printer can be as inexpensive as $30, or as much as multiples of thousands of dollars, even $9,000 to $10,000, so really a big range. Common consumer type printers include the dot matrix, not so much anymore like we already mentioned, but primarily these days inkjet and laser. You also see some that are specifically labeled as photo printers. They're intended to work very well with full color photographs for printing out your snapshots and things like that. We also have those multifunction machines that we talked about. Not only do we have inkjet and laser, but sometimes we have other types of things that we can use as well. For example, the Xerox company has kind of a waxy thing. It's almost like a crayon that they use instead of regular ink or toner used in a laser jet. And sometimes for special things, you may also see something called a dye printer. So all different kinds of things to actually get the color on the page, but they all kind of fall into these categories. For general consumer printers, inkjet, laser, photo, and multifunction are the 4 categories that you'll be most interested in. Printers vary widely in their price, and often their price is related to their features. Some of the most specific features that you'll want to think about are, do they have more than one paper or output tray? Since I do a lot of printing of courseware, I need to have more than one output tray. That way I can keep glossy stock in one and regular stock in another. In a business, you may have letterhead in one tray and second sheets in another, or maybe even envelopes in a third. So the number of paper trays that you have can be important. Otherwise, you have to switch the trays in and out or switch the paper in and out. One of my favorite features is called duplexing. This feature means the printer can print on both sides of the paper without you having to touch it. It's kind of fun to watch. It basically kind of almost spits out a page and then it sucks it back up and prints on the other side, flipping it over internally. It's kind of fun. If you need to print things that are going to be bound or they need to be double-sided, this is almost an indispensable feature. And then lastly, we also have networked printers. I need to have a networked printer because I don't want to purchase a printer for every person that works in my office. By buying 1 or 2 printers that sit on the network, they all can be shared by multiple people. Lastly, we have that multifunction machine, and just as a review, the basic features that we find there is the ability to scan and copy, as well as fax, in addition to doing regular printing. You'll find printers with all of these different combinations and more, so just be careful to read the features that are offered with your printer, as well as the type of printer that it is. Well, since printers are hardware, we know that it has to be connected somehow to the CPU. And this really isn't much different than mice and keyboards and some of the things that we've talked about. You can have wired printers that are going to be wired either to the printer port or to the USB port. We can also have wireless, which includes Bluetooth, that's going to have some type of receiver, usually attached to a USB port, but again, Bluetooth printers may have some of that embedded into the CPU, like it does in a laptop. When it comes to network printers, we actually have a couple of options. A network printer can technically be made available through other computers. For example, if you're sitting at home and you have 2 computers, one for you and one for the kids, you may not want to purchase 2 printers. You may physically connect a printer to your computer. That's known as a local printer, and it's going to use that wired technology we already mentioned. But if your kids want to print, and if you have a network at home, they may be able to access the printer connected to your computer by going through your computer. It's not physically connected to their computer, but it is physically connected to yours. Now I mentioned that one because that's different than a truly networked computer. A truly networked computer is standalone. It's not connected to a CPU anywhere. It has its own connection to the computer network, and it doesn't require itself to be connected to any other computers. This is what you find in most businesses. The reason this is important is because with the first one, if you turn off your computer as the parent, then that printer is no longer available to your kids. With a truly networked printer, it doesn't matter which computers are turned on or off. Any of the computers on the network will be able to print to the network printer. One of the newest types of printer connectivities that we're seeing now is something called an internet-based printer. Now again, I won't go into all of the details here, but really all it requires is an internet connection. So if you have a small office with 10 people, you have a printer sitting in that office that has a connection to the network. It's really a special form of networking. But instead of going through the network, anybody with a browser can open up the internet, go to a special address, and send a print job. Now it may be difficult to see why that's important, because if you're all in the office, it's just the same as a network printer. But what an internet-enabled printer allows me to do is it allows me to send a print job to my office in Boise, Idaho, even if I happen to be sitting back in Washington, D.C. As long as I have an internet connection, I can send things to the printer. Now that kind of brings in this whole new cool possibility of being able to print from thousands of miles away. So when we get past the hardware, how do we actually print a file? Well, first you have to either select or open the file. Then you're going to click the printer button on the toolbar, or you can use the print menu command, usually from the file menu, such as File Print, or if you're working with Office 2007 or Office 2010, you can choose Print from the Office button, or the universal keyboard shortcut for printing is always Control P, P for print. Once you do one of those things, you're going to see the Print dialog box. From the Print dialog box, you might choose to adjust the actual printer you're printing to. For example, in an office, you may have 2 or 3 printers from which you can choose. You can set the number of copies. If you're printing multiple copies of a multi-page document, you can choose whether you want those to be collated. In other words, is it going to print 111, 222, 333, or is it going to print 123, 123, 123? So when you take it out of the paper tray, they're already put together and all you have to do is separate each set instead of manually collating them. You will then have a variety of other printer-specific properties like duplexing that you can set up, depending on the actual printer. But choosing the printer, the number of copies, and collation are the 3 things that you'll probably do most often when you